All right, let's give the word.
Right.
Welcome, everyone, to the Finance Commission meeting of Thursday, July 13, 2023. We're located in the Finance Commission room, and this is a virtual meeting. Quorum being present, we also have Sarah Sullivan, who's coming from Florida today. So thank you, Florida. Thank you, Sarah. Good to see you here. Very aggressive schedule today. So let's get right to it. Meeting minutes for approval, June 21st, 2023.
Motion to approve.
A second?
Motion made by Sarah, seconded by Maya to approve. Further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous.
Do we have to do roll call, Alan? Or are we?
We probably, as soon as we did that, I'm like, yeah, we could do roll call. So, let's do Maya,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes.
Yes.
and Chairman votes yes. Okay, thank you. Next thing we have is we want to talk to Capital Outlay Committee about capital projects. They're going to be beginning their debate of what they'd like to bring forward for the special town meeting in November, and we're fortunate to have the chairman of Capital Outlay, Bob Donnelly, with us virtually. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you.
So I think what we'd like to do is just to, just maybe start the discussion about, monies that are going to be available, looking at things like debt service rolling off, where we think we may be with free cash, as well as with potential use of the Forbes money. So, as people also recall at last town meeting, when we made our presentation, we talked about we have to be very careful with how we finance capital projects in the future, because money's beginning to get a little bit tight, and we also have to think about, because we never really have a bad project presented to us. All projects that we've seen have merit. But we also, given the financial conditions, or looking not on now, but looking forward, we want to be sure that we fund the right projects for the right reasons, the have-to-haves and not necessarily the nice-to-haves. So with that, let me introduce Bob. I don't know if Bob wants to make a few remarks, and then we may talk a little bit about where we are with debt service and cash.
Okay. So, yeah, we've been meeting for a few months now in capital outlay. We're working from the list of proposed FY24 projects that were actually on the plan approved last year. So we are having a meeting in August. That's the 3rd, I believe. And at that time, this will be the opportunity for department heads to come in with the actual, the presentation of the project. So we do expect that proposed list of FY24 projects for the department heads to come in and start talking about what are their priorities, what are the changes in the projects that they had listed on the plan from last year. Hopefully have updates in terms of what the cost estimates are going to be, because we know in a couple of cases, like the pool fees, like the pool, Haas pool, that there have been changes in the cost of constructing the pool. We also, from a financial perspective, and we've done a lot of work on just some policy recommendations to include information on maybe getting a set of criteria that the committee can use that might be a little more effective in having us prioritize and evaluate the projects that we are going to be seeing in August from the department heads. And in terms of finances, well, we looked at last year's plan, and you do have the detail there that as the initial estimate is about $25.6 million worth of projects on the proposed list. About half that amount has to do with 3 projects, really. The pool construction, the replacement or the painting and repair of the water tanks, and the upgrade of the traffic signals at Washington and Manhattan Street. Those 3 projects alone are about 13, $14 million worth of projects. So, and as you said, Alan, you know, those are three projects that are very large and very have a lot of merit to them, if you will. It's not our prerogative to base our decisions on the finances that are presented with each project. We understand that. That's your prerogative, if you will. You're the ones that do make the recommendation to town meeting. However, we did at our last meeting said that we were interested in similar information that you've outlined in your opening remarks, Alan. Since we do fund many of our projects outside of the operating budget using free cash and debt service money, borrowing, you know, we do certainly would like to have you know, and Meg, I think will come in with this in August. We would like to have at least a conservative estimate of what kind of dollars we are looking at for certified free cash. What kind of, we're not going to make any decisions that night, but it would be helpful for us to have an estimate of what we are going to be working with going into the August, into the fall. And, you know, certainly the operating budget, we have, in every year, we have debt service that is coming off the rolls, and, you know, kind of we kind of hopeful to get a conservative estimate of what we can put on the debt service budget, just to give us some financial parameters, realizing that all those numbers too may not be solidified in August. Again, we're going to be mostly talking about with the department heads about the specifics of their projects, and if they're ready, we can probably have some conversations with them in terms of what priority they would have. But that's about where we are at. So I don't know. I know Maev and Sarah are also on the outlay committee. If there's something that that you need to put forward that I've missed, go right ahead as well. But that kind of gives you an idea of where we're at.
Yeah, I agree with what Bob said. You know, one of the things that the capital outlay committee talked about a little bit, and we've talked about as well, is by changing the schedule of when capital outlay is done, that changes kind of when we need to talk about the implication on the rest of the budget. And so I think the capital outlay committee is just kind of looking for a little bit more guidance on that. I think we mentioned we'd like to know how much is rolling off debt service so that we can figure out how much is coming on. Meg has provided us with some numbers on that. And we need to then figure out, okay, if this much is coming off of debt service, then how much, you know, long-term debt can we take on? How much shorter-term debt can we take on? How does that in it? I think we've talked collectively about our goal is sort of to keep our debt service number level.
Yeah, with the understanding that there may be certain projects which have to be built.
Absolutely.
You know, which incur debt, and if they're important projects, then deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in terms of debt service, you know, we also have you know, one of our projects is the water tanks project. So, you know, usually when we talk about debt service, we're really focused on what's hitting the operating budget, but, you know, it might be a good time also to kind of talk about, well, in the enterprise fund for spending in our water enterprise fund, you know, are there any metrics or any red flags that we should be aware of in terms of additional debt that any of those projects would put on the enterprise fund? We know that they're paid for by rates, but, you know, it's also something that I think generally the town would want to keep an eye on as well.
Why don't we first talk about debt, which is going off general government, and then let's talk a little bit afterwards about implications for additional debt on the water side. So, Meg?
Yes. So I did the end that you're all looking at right now. That is that's a schedule from our financial advisors of a summary of debt service. It's for the next 10 years. So I focused more like at the bottom part is the electric, the broadband, water, sewer, but I felt like that wasn't really the focus right now in terms of what we're talking about. I looked more at the general fund and the school borrowing. So And again, there's sort of a delay. So although there are some debt issues that are falling off in 24, what happened is that the debt service that was approved tied to capital last fall
Okay.
actually exceeds what we had. So
Right.
so there is no debt service falling off for 24. And you can see from there, the debt service is 340,000 falls off in FY 25, 311,000 in 2026. So for 2025, 2026, and 2027, it's in the range of 300,000, and then it sort of decreases from there.
All right, but I mean, for the purposes of, capital outlay committee, anything that we appropriate to borrow in the fall of 23 isn't really going to show up until 25.
Pretty much. I mean, so that's where you have to have a
Yeah.
conversation with the financial advisors, because and we can have those conversations about structuring it
Yeah,
and when the first debt payments come
Yeah.
due.
Okay.
Yeah.
that's right. So we're talking about $340,000 of debt coming off the general fund.
Mhm.
Okay.
So do we know what that equates to as far as an amount for spending? I mean, how do we back, I know that's really what we're looking for, right? What would that debt service of 340, what does that equate to on the spending side? What availability do we have?
Yeah. So I'm waiting for the financial advisors to give me a number for that. So I will have to get back to you on that.
But won't a lot of it also depend on what kind of debt we're talking about, what the period,
Mhm.
there's some certain debt may be 10 years,
Mhm.
other debt may be
Right.
20 years.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's an awful lot of factors that
Yeah.
go into it.
But I think we can give a good idea of what that number is.
Mhm.
Okay, all right. Can you maybe talk a little bit about, as Bob noted, and it's been raised in the past, implications on the water and sewer side with some of the additional costs we're talking about?
Right. So, I mean, I think the consideration that you have there is that water and sewer are both new funds. So we have to be very cognizant of how much debt service we're taking on, because they don't have a built up retained earnings yet. And we do want to build up some retained earnings, because especially with water sewer, the MWRA assessments tend to fluctuate quite a bit. So you want to have
Yeah.
some retained earnings to buffer for that. So I think we'd have to look, so that can't be ignored in the equation. So I think we'd want to look at that too, because I know that there's a plan to do the water improvement. So we'd want to get the debt service calculation for that, what that translates to, and then see if in their budget that's doable. Because right now what I'm doing is going through all of we've posted the final payroll, the final accounts payable. So now it's just an analysis of where all the operations fall, and to kind of have an idea of how much surplus they may have
Okay.
going forward.
So what did you just say about the water service, that we were going to be doing something on water service
There's the water improvement program every year.
every year?
Yeah.
That, we have that, plus now, would the water tower, Bob, be involved in this? Yes.
I think what happened, I'm gonna just flip through the 24 plans. I think correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, I think we took off, or the town manager took off the infrastructure project for this particular year.
Yes,
So that,
because we couldn't have the ability with staffing to do it. I think there were too many projects. So I think I don't know if he took it completely off or if he backed off some of it.
I think it's,
Remember,
you know what I think, Sarah? I think, because the water tank program is estimated at $4,275,000, and I think the infrastructure program is about 4.5 a year. I think he talked early on about we'll postpone the infrastructure project for FY24 so that we wouldn't be taking on both the infrastructure project and the water tanks in the same year. And I'm pretty certain that's the case, because I'm not finding the infrastructure program on the 24 list of projects.
Right, so that extra water relining that we've been doing
Yeah.
every year,
Okay.
it was proposed that we delay that a year and let DPW focus on the new water tanks that year, rather than
Okay.
trying to do both at once.
Yeah,
But do we,
yeah, just looking at the list, at least the list I had, which I took right off the website. I don't know whether it's been updated, but there's projects like the meter connection to MWRA, water main cleaning and lining. Those are the kinds of things that you're saying we'll be taking off for this year?
No, no, the water main cleaning and lining from the MWRA, that is, that's a grant and loan program. If I remember right, that's I think MWRA provides the
Right.
member communities with a no interest loan. So what I'm talking about is the previous years. I think we have at least 2 years worth of water pipe relining.
We accelerated the
1.5
program.
million a year, accelerated, yes.
Yeah.
5-year program. So I believe we paused the FY24 program for water lining. It's already off this plan, so it's not included in the
Okay.
25 million that we're
Okay.
talking about for projects.
Okay, all right.
We also have to consider, and I'm not sure, we have these projects, but I know you get, as part of the stormwater committee, that's separate from all of this in capital outlay, or we haven't decided that yet, so we don't need to
Well-
think about, I mean, I just,
Yeah, yeah. Well, for most of the stormwater projects to date, and the ones that are on this particular list, we're using ARPA money for that.
okay,
And we, eventually we won't have any ARPA money to put towards those projects anymore, but that's not going to occur, Al, until about 25. I think like
Probably, yeah.
like the design, the Hennessy Field design would be funded by ARPA.
Right,
And,
Hennessy would be done hopefully this fall with Opera.
Right.
And, then we'd have some construction project, the following year.
yeah, and there's a Meadowbrook drain improvement design as well. That's a $600,000. That's on the plan, and that is funded to ARPA. So we are still taking advantage of the ARPA money for this year.
but as that falls off, we're gonna have to think more than just in a 1-year kind of increment, is to see, right, what's coming in the next second or the third year. I mean, I understand maybe not 5 years out, but we've got to kind of think critically based on, the free cash we're gonna have this year.
Well,
which has a lot of extra, we'll have a lot of like
Right.
one-time type events in it. We've got to think a little bit about that, right? I mean,
well, for stormwater, I think, we'll know better in the fall, but, that's a project that's so big that either you have to make a decision. Do you institute a stormwater fee, like many towns are doing, to fund stormwater work, stormwater utility? Or do you go to the voters and say that these projects are so big, they're so expensive that, they're worth our consideration of a Proposition 2.5 override vote to fund them?
but then we have to be cognizant we'd be doing a stormwater fee if that's how it gets decided. And I'm trying not to get ahead, but I'm just thinking out loud, I guess. You have to think about that. But then also if you're funding these water projects through rates, then rates would go up possibly as well, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Right.
Well, whether they go up, or stay stable because certain things.
Because it depends on the debt service, right?
Likely they'd go up somewhat, because I don't think enough debt service would fall off to make up for the cost of, the new projects. Judy?
I just want to ask a question. You're talking about a funding source, ARPA. You want to explain that? What that funding source is?
It's federal money, American Relief.
Rescue.
It's from the president's.
From COVID.
Yeah,
Okay, so it's a one-time
yeah,
set of money.
yeah.
So we have enough money in there to do this project.
To do this portion of the project, but the stormwater project, is upwards of $40 million.
Yeah,
on a
but I
10-year
think it's
program.
narrow, but
Yeah.
I just wanted the public to know what that
Yeah,
funding source
okay.
was and where it came from.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So David, Meg, when could Bob have something to know whether or not there's an issue with the water fund?
Very shortly, because that's the whole process. So I think if we're talking about the next capital outlay meeting,
Mhm.
by then. for sure.
Okay, so they'll have an idea of what that number
So the
is.
water sewer, yes. Free cash might be a little bit more. I might be able to get like a real tentative number, but
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a ballpark number,
Yeah.
20% either direction.
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, some of the building permit fees that we're expecting at the end of the last fiscal year, we're not going to get until after the beginning of the new fiscal year. So they're not going to show up for free cash until FY 25.
Mhm, mhm.
So we may not have still going to have a healthy free cash, but maybe not as healthy as we thought we were going to have.
Right, and it will be mostly generated from revenues.
And it's only, really one-time numbers also. It's
Right.
not going to be long-term.
Will
So,
we- Can I
Yeah,
ask a question? Will we, for that August 3rd meeting, Meg, will we have what that, the debt service fall off equates to for what debt we could incur? Okay.
Yes.
yeah. And, also potentially, at least a ballpark number for, for free cash with the understanding that,
You
free
didn't
ca-
want, it'd be,
free cash is going to be spent in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I know as a FinCom we want to talk about with the free cash policy is that the way the financial policies are written today, we'd like to keep a minimum of $500,000 in the kitty for the subsequent fiscal years, and whether we want to increase that, because we're not going to have as good a year this year as we will every year. Is to make sure we have a healthy free cash number, in subsequent years, and that's basically spend everything at once simply because the money is there.
You also, I expect you are you having conversations about the Forbes money and how that could be utilized in the big picture here? The $2 million that's sitting in reserves for
Well, I mean, well, right now, I think all the Forbes money is just sitting in one pile, as I recall.
it is.
Yeah. And Forbes money can only be used for certain things, basically for capital projects.
Yeah, so that would be the discussion is we don't know what the free cash number is, but we do know that there's 10 million from Forbes. We know that 6 million was originally earmarked for land acquisition, so 4 is available. So that 4 is available for capital at any point here. And I think that what we were hoping is when the free cash was certified, that then we would use free cash to accomplish those stabilization transfer and override stabilization
Yeah.
transfers.
Yeah,
So I mean, that may make this process a little bit easier. So as of August 3rd,
Yeah.
for the next meeting, you will know that there's 4 million in that.
yeah. I mean,
Forbes money.
great. Thank you.
let's not run with that number yet until we get a better handle of what the free cash
Yeah.
number is
But the-
going. Yeah, Sarah.
The Forbes, the 4 million in Forbes, it's specific on what it has to be spent on capital projects that are financed for a certain number of years, correct? Or is it any capital project?
5 years or longer.
5 years or longer? Okay, thank you.
You could pay,
That's most capital
Cash.
that's almost every capital
yeah,
project.
so you can pay, it isn't like you've got to finance a capital project long-term. You could use cash as
Yeah.
long as it's a capital project that's quote unquote a minimum of 5 years.
Yeah, so if you
Okay, yeah, I get you.
pretend that you're borrowing,
Yeah.
what's the debt, like, what's the lifespan of that borrowing? So the only thing that's, I think, 5 years or less are usually
It's
vehicles.
vehicles, yeah.
Okay.
So one very important thing I think haven't had any discussion on is that the cost of borrowing has gone up.
Right.
And because of our audit, most likely we will be paying more because our, what do they call it? The
Credit rating.
credit rating has gone down.
Well, it hasn't gone down yet.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't, would, Meg would know better than I, but would we be going out for, would the capital project normally cause us to go through a credit review? Or is a credit review more associated with when we do very, very large capital projects, the high school, the middle school, or something for the light department?
Every time we go out to borrow, they do an S&P rating call.
Okay.
Right. So hopefully by August, we'll have at least a handle on the free cash to give us an idea of how much money in cash could be spent for projects, primarily, taking it out of Forbes, up to, and I emphasize the up to 4 million from Forbes. And we use free cash maybe to put into some of the reserve funds that we tried to do initially with Forbes.
Mhm.
And at least to talk about it anyway.
Okay, I'm sorry, may I?
And yeah,
Um, it's a good idea. I like this idea. But my problem here is that we're going to be looking at spending this money, and we are saying that we're going to put this money back into a reserve fund.
Mhm.
The tough part about being one of the oldest people on this board is that you've seen a lot. And I remember some times that promises were made. And one of the biggest one was when the hospital came to town. And we took the civic money and we put it in a fund for the civic. But when things were really bad, that money for the civic was used for recreation purposes, but it wasn't used for what it was intended for, which was to replace a swimming pool. Now, this is kind of a funky little thing because it's recreation and it doesn't, say, oh, it's not the most important thing we've ever dealt with. But that's what happened. We
Mhm.
didn't have any money. So, if they wanted to do something at the recreation department, it was voted like, oh, take it out of your reserve fund. So I am a little leery unless we get something in writing from all people involved. I would not really support this. I'm sorry. It needs to be in writing. It needs to be, signed by people. I'm sorry, because there's too much of an opportunity not to do it.
So I take your point, but I also think that whenever it was at town meeting, was it the spring of 22? When we first made the vote with Forbes money, that roughly 2 million was going to go into override stabilization and 2 million was going to go into the general purpose stabilization and $6 million was going to set aside for. So I just see this as an opportunity to do that, to do exactly what town meeting wanted to do more than a year ago.
I understand.
And so I guess I don't understand, were you opposed to that?
No.
Okay, so why were you opposed to doing that now in the fall?
Because we were actually, we had that money. It was going there.
Well, that would be
So-
what would happen.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what would happen. Instead of so assume we have $4 million in free cash that is sort of available to spend on capital outlay. Instead of spending that $4 million on capital outlay, we would take $4 million from Forbes and spend that on capital outlay. At the same town meeting, we would put $2 million of free cash into the override stabilization and $2 million of free cash into the regular stabilization. So we get to the exact place that we said we wanted to be a year ago.
It's really a matter of having a number of motions which would do that. And it's up to town meeting. I mean, town meeting's the ultimate arbiter.
then
but
that's
town
my-
meeting would
that's
have
my
to be the one.
We're accomplishing what town meeting wanted by doing this, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
we-
Correct.
And I,
Yeah,
I just want to make sure that it happens that way.
that's the
Yeah,
way.
no, I
that-
definitely
I
agree
mean,
with you.
Because otherwise,
We would propose the articles and the motions. That's the way we would propose it again, it's at the will of town meeting, but that's what we would be asking for.
Okay. It will be at
Again,
the special
we're sort of putting the cart a
same
little
town
bit
meeting.
before the horse, because we don't know what the final dollars are, but assuming, things go positively, that's the plan.
I just needed to bring that up because
Hopefully we've learned from history.
Yeah.
Right.
He who knows the lessons of history is doomed to repeat them. Somebody from my high school, not the same class as me, but whatever. Bob, you have anything further you'd like to add or talk about?
No, just it's a good conversation and good parameters financially that you're talking through, and I think it will be helpful to the committee and helpful ultimately for the department heads to get an understanding of the picture as well. So thank you.
Yeah, and again, we understand that there are certain
Yeah.
projects that have to go. We get that, but, we're trying to give you some parameters, in a perfect world and see what we can work with. You have some
Sarah,
more?
I'm sorry.
So, I wanted to just discuss briefly the capital improvement planning policy that the capital outlay committee had looked at. If you look at this policy, the things in bold are the language that had changed. Some of the language that changed was just about dates and things like that. The old policy said that the capital outlay plan would be presented in the spring, and we changed it to be more generic and say annually or something like that. The bigger thing, we said specifically that we thought anytime something was coming up before town meeting, a capital project was coming up through town meeting, it should come before the capital outlay committee. If there's an adjustment, things like that, if we're asking town meeting to vote for additional money or something, that should go back through
Like
capital
what
outlay.
happened this past year.
Right. And then I think the biggest change, and Bob and Sarah can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the biggest change starts on page 2, where it kind of talks about the criteria that would be used to evaluate the relative merit of each project. And we talked about, imminent threat to health and safety, maintenance, protection, and improvement of capital assets, requirement compliance with federal and state laws, improve infrastructure, improve productivity or efficiency, reduce energy use, projects that address an improvement of an overburdened situation. And then we added projects where due to supply and demand issues, there's a financial or an operational advantage to take action earlier, like we did with the ambulances, like we know this is going to be a long lead time. So we just tried to put in writing some of the things, the factors that we thought the capital outlay committee should be considering as they're making decisions.
Yeah, no, I looked at these. I think, these are great. I mean, I think exactly the kinds of things you should be looking for. The other question I had was whether this is just a list or it's like in some sequential order, things which are more critical than others.
I don't think we really said that there was a list, right, Maya?
I don't think we said that there was a priority.
Okay.
It was like, these are all the factors that
Okay.
should be considered.
Okay,
And
I just wasn't sure.
We wanted to give some guidance to the department heads too, as they prepared presentations or their pitches to the capital outlay committee, just to have an idea of what pieces would we be looking at when we were evaluating the projects for approval. I think that was the basic idea of that list,
So I
right?
think-
A little more guidance on how we make
Yeah.
these
But
decisions.
no, I think this is good.
I think the only thing that's come up since we last met, and I was talking to Mike Rosen about this, and it might have been some insights from you, is that last statement that defines what a capital project is, a non-recurring projects. And there's a calculation in there that just gives an example that says, well, a capital project basically is going to be one that hits a threshold of 500,000. And in reality, when we look at our projects, we, in particular, the design side, we have projects that don't hit that threshold at all. We have projects that, design projects that are 25, 50,000 and what have you, plus our equipment purchases. So I don't know whether or not it's worth our while to tackle that last statement and get a more rigorous statement regarding what exactly do we consider a capital project. Because as we look at the list that we have today, the ones that are presented really wouldn't fit that criteria. That's my read.
Okay. All right.
I'm glad you said that, because that is a paragraph that I had been, I thought it didn't work for all of the projects that I've seen over the years that have been capital outlay,
Yeah, okay,
There-
Now
Yeah.
that we get there,
okay,
and that's not right.
all right. Well, one last thing I wanted to mention is one of the projects on your potential capital plan is a concession stand, for the high school. I was talking to somebody who was involved with the concession stand. I think they built in Walpole, where they had, 10 stalls, 5 male, 5 female. Built about a year and a half ago, so the cost may have changed a little bit, but that went for 1.2 million. Okay, so,
Well, we also know that, this is listed. It'll be interesting to hear the presentation in August, but this is targeted at 300,000. And I don't know if that building that's proposed for the high school is much different than it would be for the middle school. I think the middle school probably is going to be a larger building, but that's nearly 700,000.
yeah, the middle school, it's the building itself, which I think may have one head.
Yeah.
What it had before, the old building.
What?
That's what the old building
Yeah.
had.
Yeah, I can't, but it wasn't subject to the building code because there's no stands there. That's, plus or minus 700,000. So when you have to add all the other facilities, I mean, it just adds up. So we'll see.
We can, I'm wondering if maybe for high school events, we can rent the Haley Kitchen
Yes, I would be
Or,
very happy
right around the corner.
to check out the lights.
We'll share profits here.
Yeah.
Just turn off those lights.
Yeah, the escalation in small building costs has been remarkable. It's a learning I think Alan and I have from the discussions with the middle school building committee as to why that concession stand lands at almost 700,000. But bids are in, and they came in under 700,000. It's a separate building from the school, and that entails a lot more design and construction than you would anticipate, I guess. But
It was part of the bid. It wasn't a change order. So it was part of the bid. That's what it came in as.
But how much did we pay for that, for the bathrooms down at the Hawes Pool? That was over $1 million.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
The bathhouse.
bathhouse, yeah, it was
1.1
million plus.
Yeah.
I think it came in originally at $1 million, then we had to add like 250 or 300,000 afterwards, I believe.
We had to stand all those people up straight in the pool to get a count of how many people were going to use that bathroom. It's the
Okay,
weirdest thing.
all right. Anything else on capital outlay so I can let Bob go?
No. So Bob, are you going, and one more thing. I'm
Sure.
sorry. Are you going to take a look at that paragraph there? And
I think I might just try to float something by, I went and looked at some policies from other towns, and I might just try to float the language by the committee via email to get some insights from folks as to, is it worth our tackling, upon reviewing it, and looking at the other policies, I said, well, it kind of makes a little sense, but that's just me. And so I guess what we should probably do is just kind of provide a sample from another policy in another town and just see if it resonates with people enough to edit the policy one more time. The never-ending edit.
this was on the original policies that we had.
Yes.
And, yeah, and I'm not sure that I think everything else in the policy, this new policy, I'm not sure, could we do without the whole paragraph? I mean, is there a reason to have this?
I don't know. I kind of think it might make sense for us to get a little more descriptive in what we consider a capital project. So like that particular paragraph doesn't speak in terms of, we do design projects, we do some feasibility studies, we do actual construction projects. All of those come under the capital budget, capital plan at any particular year. So I think it's worthwhile to kind of put them in there as examples of the kind of things that can be qualified as a capital project.
Okay.
Okay,
That
Yeah.
works.
all right.
And that will be it. There'll be no more edits to it.
Okay, good. Well, thank you, Bob. I think this is great. I think, we should, the two committees should do this periodically. But I think this has been very useful for both of us.
All right, folks. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Bob. All right. I think we all have a better handle of where each of us are coming from, which is good. Okay, let's get to some of the business that we have to take care of by the end of the fiscal year.
End of the day today.
All right, municipal relief transfers.
There are none.
Okay, wait a minute. We're not review existing debt service.
We did.
We did that.
Okay.
We did that with Bob.
Okay.
Municipal relief, there aren't any.
There are.
Okay.
Reserve fund.
Reserve fund transfers, you have two for us.
I do. I have, it's for the legal line. So the legal line is historically, it's just been underfunded, and I think it's just a function of the town budget only grows, or town school budgets only grow so much every year. So it looks like for the past 3 years, the legal line is hovering around 500,000, and it looks like there's been an attempt to incrementally increase it, but it still keeps falling short. And this year it is actually less than previous years, but it's under 500,000, but
So is this, this general legal services, nothing, out of the ordinary or any special
No.
event or whatever?
no, I mean,
This is just, it's almost like residual.
right. I mean, so this is every year it's over, and this year's actually spent less than previous fiscal years. So
Okay.
it's just a function of the line. It just hasn't quite reached the point where it's fully funded, or where it's not funded at the point where it should be.
Okay. Comments, questions?
On the legal one?
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Can I ask more generally, we're talking about paying this out of the reserve fund. What was the balance in the reserve fund when we started this?
I believe it's at 130. Hold on. It's the sum of these two transfers.
Okay, so this will empty the
It totally,
reserve
yeah.
fund. Okay, that's.
Yeah, so
all I need to
it'll
know.
zero it out.
Mhm.
Okay. Hate paying attorneys.
How is CLA being paid for?
That is being paid for with other general government budget lines.
Okay.
Surpluses and other general government.
Surpluses in
Right.
the line.
All right.
That doesn't require municipal relief?
It technically does not, because the way that we voted in the budget book, we vote general government, public safety, public works. And so and I've had this conversation with the Department of Revenue, is what's the intention of town meeting? Because I've been in towns where you vote like accounting salaries, accounting expenses. And
That's
so
the way
Right.
we used to do
Yeah.
it.
That is the way we used to do it.
Yeah.
right, and
That's
so
the way
you're,
we should be doing it.
and so you're very tied to that. So if like accounting salaries goes over, you've got to get a transfer. If accounting expenses goes over, but once you start to expand that scope and you're voting like general government, public safety, public works, that's the line that can't go over.
So I don't know how the vote is done. I can't remember exactly what the language is. I understand we vote general government altogether, but is that still, that's divided into salaries and expenses, right?
It's divided into departments.
I mean, I always assume that when we do that, you may vote general government or public safety as an example, but I always assume that the departments were separate.
Mhm, mhm,
Okay.
mhm. I mean, I don't foresee that we're going to have an issue with this, because again, it's the interpretation of the Department of Revenue is what's the bottom line for that. I mean, let's go back to town meeting for a second. How does that vote occur? Like, don't we just say like Article X?
I mean, we have the motion,
Yeah,
right? That
right.
specifically calls out the amount.
Mhm.
For
a
each,
tip.
individual department for a total of.
Mhm. So again, it's the intention of town meeting. So even though it breaks it out by department, I think it's what's the intention of town meeting. So I'm going to be honest. I feel like you could interpret it either way.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, it's something I think we're gonna have to
Address.
talk about. I mean, we've already done this year, obviously. I think something we clearly have to talk about for next year. So town meeting knows exactly what they're voting on, so there's no question.
Because the way we're looking at it right now, so general government as a whole will have a surplus of $68,000.
Yeah.
So if there are shortfalls within that category, overall they're covered. So I don't foresee that we're going to have an issue with this because the auditors haven't questioned it to date. If there is, so from the state perspective, the audit perspective, there's not an issue. However, if internally that's not the intention, that would be the part that has to be
Okay,
addressed.
cool.
So when you close out the year,
Hmm.
at some point, there's a, we look in the budget book as like, this is the budgeted amount, and then we have when you go back a couple of years and you see this is the final number. I forget exactly what, like, as spent, basically.
Mhm.
Yeah.
When will we get those numbers for FY '23 and have an opportunity to see how close we came to budget within individual lines?
So I had this conversation with my staff yesterday. So how you get like the monthly reports, the monthly expenditure reports.
Mhm.
So we're kind of talking about how we should send it out. So I think what we'll ultimately do is now that we've processed the final payroll, the final accounts payable, I think we could send out all those monthly expenditure reports. We're not sending them to departments because usually what it is, this is how much money you have left. You want to double check that. That serves no purpose at this particular point. So what I told them is, why don't we just send it to FinCom and the Board of Selectmen? With the caveat that I still have journal entries that are required or that will be needed in closing the books, but you will get those reports and it should be fairly
Mhm.
soon.
Okay, I think this is something that has to be cleared up, before the next town meeting, so that everybody knows exactly what they're voting on. It's not, well, you could do it this way, you could do it that way. It'll be, well, we're doing it, whichever way it is, we're doing it this way.
Mhm. And again, there's what's the legal requirement versus what's the town, what does the town want,
Yeah, okay, all right.
So we'll get those reports and we'll be able to see the variances, any
Yes.
significant variances within a department, let's just say.
Okay. All right, legal, we've discussed. Library salaries.
Yes, library salaries, and that is due to, there were a couple of significant buyouts. I think, there was one employee who has been around for several years. So that was part of it. And then there's also, the weekend service.
Weekend service wasn't originally budgeted, when library services was voted, so
Yeah.
that would make up a difference.
And why
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
that come before us before they did that?
That's what I was gonna ask.
Did
I was going to
don't
say,
remember that they
like,
did.
I'm in favor of the library and weekend service, but I feel like if a department is deciding they're going to overspend their line item, shouldn't that get approved somewhere? And who approved that?
I'm not sure whether it's really the library board that makes that call. And putting aside the budget issues, I think it's the library board that makes the decision of, hours and
Yeah,
and all that kind of stuff. Did they discuss it with anyone? Not with us.
Okay.
Whose
Also, didn't they have-
responsibility is it?
Didn't they also have some personnel, not only folks leaving and stuff, but didn't they have some changes in going through, I think they went through the personnel board to make some significant changes.
That doesn't hit until 24.
That doesn't hit till 24. Okay.
In answer to Sarah's question, the responsibility, I think, should be with the library board to inform both the selectmen and the FinCom that by instituting this policy, because you say, well, we're gonna open up Sunday, everybody goes, wow, that's great. But I think it's probably their responsibility to tell both the FinCom and the selectmen that by doing this, we're gonna incur additional costs of whatever. At least so we know, so we can have a conversation if necessary.
I think maybe a letter to different people, and I was just sitting and thinking, the same thing could happen in the rec department or any other little offshoot of us, that that before making decisions like that, that will involve a higher cost, that they should notify maybe your office and you can tell us and, or something.
You talking about a general letter or just something
Ju- I-
specific to the library in
No,
this
nothing,
instance?
no, a general letter. I'm sure that the library didn't do it on purpose.
I mean, it wasn't any,
You know, I
evil
mean,
purpose.
it
no.
was, we made this decision and off we go, but,
And if Meg would like to draft a letter to that, like that, to the different departments, I'd be willing to sign it.
Well, I think we had discussed that, as part of the payroll review.
Mhm.
That was one of the things I had noted is that the accounting office does send out, emails to departments that are over their spend rate. And we do ask, what's your plan to come in
Mhm.
on target? And we don't always get responses. So I think that that's something that should be required. Because I mean, I think it's the accounting function to know
Yeah.
this is going to be over.
Yeah,
It's not necessarily I don't think I don't think my office has the authority to say like how that's going to be then covered.
mhm.
I mean, I could say what the funding sources are. I could say this.
No,
is
the thing,
over.
all your office or the accounting office could say is that, at the spend rate, you're gonna be over what you've been budgeted.
Which is what
by
we
town
do,
meeting.
which is what we say.
Yeah.
Which is what we do.
Yeah.
Can I,
So, go ahead, Sarah.
I'm sorry, and I think this is because I'm new, so I'm just trying to understand. We're doing a reserve fund transfer for library salaries, correct? That's what we're talking about right now. But under the previous, like, there were no municipal relief transfers because you handled everything within the budget. Is this something that couldn't be handled within all of that, or is it a completely different item? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to understand the difference.
Well, this was a discussion with the general manager's office as to how we've got these lines that are over. This is our plan for funding. If that makes sense.
Well, I guess if we finished with a surplus of municipal of 68, right, on the general government side, is library not contained in that, or why wouldn't we have used that? Is this something I'm not understanding about town accounting? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to understand.
I think library is separate from general government.
The culture and recreation.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm just trying to understand.
Okay, so in any event, I mean, would a letter from us, make any sense at all, or be a reasonable thing to do?
That would
Just to
be-
inform them that, we're watching you kind of thing?
it would
Yeah,
be
in the
great.
proper,
Language,
professional, yeah, well,
diplomatic, all the
I'd
things.
I'd be more than happy to sign that.
Okay, thank you. I would appreciate that.
Just understanding how the mechanism for this works. I mean, at some point, there had to be a payroll warrant generated that included this payment, but there was no money in that account to cover it. And yet the warrant was presumably approved. How does that work?
So the way that Munis is set up and every municipal financial software will be the same in Massachusetts is that it will code to stop an overage on an expense line. It does not code to stop on a salary line because there's a Mass General law that says you have to pay people within 7 days. So it doesn't matter whether the funding is available or not within 7 days, that those people have to be paid.
Certainly not arguing that we shouldn't pay people for time worked, but I do think that, if there isn't money, then somebody should be looking ahead and saying, either we need to get more money in this budget line, or we need to lay off in the next, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever
Yeah.
the time period is.
I think what you're also saying is that, maybe this is something that should have been handled at town meeting, because certainly by
Yes.
town meeting,
They all knew.
exact number,
Yeah.
but you would have known that there's gonna be a shortage in that particular budget line, and let's make it up, at least to the best of our ability or knowledge to make that number up.
I agree, absolutely.
Yeah.
Speed that.
Sarah, do you have anything to say?
No, I agree with you. That's,
Okay,
it's known then that it should have been raised then, not now.
I agree. I mean, that's, for something that was known, that clearly should have been raised earlier, and I think that I'm not sure what the mechanism is to ensure that gets done, but something I think that has to get done. We've usually done this at town meeting. We didn't do it for whatever reason this year at town meeting. I think it's something clearly that should be done, and let the town meeting members, let them make the call, let them make the decision. That's what they're there for.
Tara's raising her hand.
Sarah,
Megan, the Munis system, when you talked about payroll and how it processes, because we are responsible for paying people, I understand that. But is there some type of report that highlights that, that there wasn't funds in that account? Because if there are, shouldn't that generate some type of action?
I would say that my staff noted this very early on in the fiscal year,
Okay.
that there was an overage.
And told the folks at,
The library, and we
library
got a
that they
response
needed to-
from the library.
okay.
Mhm.
which was,
Yes, we're going to be over.
oh, okay. All right, I mean, it's water over the dam. It should have happened at town meeting. It didn't. Let's, whatever steps we can take to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again.
All right, so I'd like to make a motion to approve these reserve fund transfers.
I'll second.
Okay,
Can I get signatures?
all right, we have a motion, which has been seconded, I guess.
That me.
Do we have any further discussion on these?
No.
Hearing none, let's do a roll call. Mayev,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes.
Ann,
Yes.
and Chairman votes yes. Approved.
Meg, do
Okay.
you need me to print that and send it to you with my signature on it, or can I just sign it later?
I think if I have a majority,
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You're giving up an opportunity to get a very special person's
I'll
signature.
get your signature another time, Sarah.
Yeah, it might be famous someday. All right. That's it for relief transfers. All right, moving along pretty well. Department of Revenue review request. That was your thing originally, Ann. Why don't you talk about that?
Well, I'll be repeating myself, but the Department of Revenue under the DLS supports towns and helps towns to write up policies and different ways of doing things. So I think that after having gone through this year and getting a not quite stellar review from our excuse me, review when they had the audit, we should reach out to the Department of Revenue / DLS and ask them to help us with some policies and procedures, things that we should be doing. And the reason I'm saying this is that, first of all, it's free.
Really great.
It's free. Second of all, it shows them, the Department of Revenue, that we are serious and that we have concerns about where we are and what we are doing. And I think that that is the most important thing that we can give to the DOR, because otherwise, if we kind of like go out to another company and ask them to do it, we may not get exactly everything that, DOR says we should have. And the other thing is that, I think it should give DOR the feeling that we realize that we have some issues and that we're taking care of them. And we recognize them as the people that we should see.
Okay. Well, Meg, you've had some experience with this.
Yes, I have.
Positive?
It's very positive. I mean, because the only reason they come out is there's no agenda. They're very objective. It's just, this is what we're seeing across other communities. And they'll filter through, because like some things that other communities are doing wouldn't work here. So they tailor it to the community. And it's best practices to have your finance offices functioning optimally.
Okay. All right, now as a finance commission, we can't request that directly. We could maybe make a request of the selectmen that they make a request.
Mhm.
So, with that, pleasure of the committee.
I would say, okay, Sarah.
I just-
Sarah?
I just have a question because I know we can't make the decision, but I know that there's, Maya's sitting on that committee with Bob Donnelly, and I mean, would it be an appropriate thing to discuss there, or is it more just we request this of the Board of Selectmen? I'm just because it's the Board of Selectmen who have to request it, right? So would it be helpful, would it come out of a conversation at those meetings, or is it more just for us as a committee to say we'd like to have this and ask the Board of Selectmen to request? I mean, I'm trying to find the best way to make sure that like everybody's
I
on.
mean, what I would suggest, and please, if people have a better idea, that's fine. If we say we feel this is the right way to go, is to have Meg draft a letter, basically saying that the FinCom is unanimously, let's.
Assuming, yes.
He voted to that this is a great idea, and we request that the Board of Selectmen, take appropriate action to do whatever this has to, whatever.
Okay.
So that's what I would suggest.
Because I think as I read those reports that you asked us to review, I think it adds, I mean, it's tremendous. I think it really goes towards the structure, which I think is one of the things that we're struggling with. So I think that just seems of extreme value to me to get this done. So.
Okay, all right. And
One of the, I think people have to understand, and especially the selectmen have to understand, and everybody, a lot of new people in the selectmen's office, that DOR isn't our enemy by any stretch of the imagination. And they have to understand this document here. Bob Donnelly and I spent days, hours, reading DOR's policies. This is how that came about.
Mhm.
So either we ask them for their professional help or we continue taking paragraphs out of everybody else's policies.
Right.
And it may not be appropriate that we do that.
Okay,
Mhm.
all right. Okay, so pleasure of the committee.
I say that we write a letter to the selectmen suggesting that we do, asking them to
Request.
request this process
Okay.
for us.
I'll second that.
Made and seconded. Further discussion. So this would be a letter that Meg would draft for my signature. Okay. All right. No further discussion. I'll take a roll call. Maya,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes.
and
Yes.
Chairman votes yes, unanimous. Great, thank you. Okay. Moving right along. Schedule.
Use in the meeting.
I don't know how much time we really have to discuss schedule today. I took just a very rough look at schedule, for the most part, maybe just to put something forward for people to take a look at. And I will send you a copy of this, Sarah. I
Okay.
apologize for not sending it to you
Nope, that's okay.
previously. Just to highlight, some of the important things that we do. I didn't put specific dates, just monthly dates on them. Something maybe to think about and discuss in more detail at our next meeting.
Yeah, the only thing I would ever say is that with the quarterly reviews.
Should it be the following?
Yes, it
Yeah,
should be the following one.
I wasn't sure, whether, the July, review of the previous fourth quarter should be July or August. So,
Yeah.
okay.
Do you still have your version of last year's?
It's,
calendar?
it's in the Google Drive. We've got it.
Oh,
Figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is just a rough, people could say it's great. People can just throw it in, in the circular file and whatever. But just something just to start the process going.
okay. And we will need to share this with the school committee because the school committee already has their calendar.
You also may want to move the meeting with the assessor to December, I think.
Okay, I mean, that's some of this, one of the things I think we would like to confirm, but it's okay.
But then once we finalize this, we'd want to share it too with the town manager's office and everyone, right? Because we're dependent upon them for
Right,
meeting most of these dates, correct? Or-
right, yep,
Right. Okay,
okay, good.
thank you, Al.
Do
Thank
we
you.
have a date for our next meeting?
The Thursday of August, I guess.
That's fine with me. I don't think we specifically,
No, it's usually we
It's
probably
been
should,
the
third Thursday of the
third
month, which
Thursday.
is
so
what
that would
day?
be August 17th.
Okay, hopefully I'm not doing anything on August 17th, but I'll make plans to.
You-
Yeah.
I've got plans too.
All right, other topics. I know there's one I'd like to bring up, but before I do, any topics from anyone?
Can I just throw one thing out there?
Yeah.
That John Chicharulo from General Manager's Office and I we're working on a tentative calendar, like a comprehensive calendar for the year, incorporating all sorts of dates and just to establish when revenue forecast should be worked on, when departmental budgets should be
Yeah.
due, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that will be
Good, okay,
Excellent.
Great.
that's a great idea. All right, comments from anyone else?
Would we be doing our meeting at 6:30 on that date?
on Teams.
I would prefer 5:30 if people
Okay.
can make
Okay,
it. We only had to do 7:30 today because yours truly had a meeting here from 6 to 7.
okay.
The only other thing I'd like to bring up is whether we'd like to, at least for this year anyway, periodically have the fire chief in to talk about their budget. I mean, for about 10 years, we really had no problems with the fire budget at all. It was after having some real problems, before that, particularly with substitution, but everything seemed to be working very well. And then this year, I think primarily because of the number of absences, which were unexpected, we had some issues with the budget where we had to make some changes to the budget to add significant amount of money. So I guess it's a question of whether this is a one-year event, which is what I'm hoping it is, or whether this is something long-term that we should, acknowledge and then have adjust the budget accordingly. So what I'd like to do is maybe, on a quarterly basis, maybe commensurate with when we do the quarterly review, either we ask the fire chief to come in or, we review their budget to see what their spend rate is versus what we actually appropriated. Seem reasonable? Sarah, you have a question?
No, I'm thinking, sorry.
Okay.
I mean, should we bring him in as opposed to any other department head? Or, I understand that this year that's the department where we had some issues, or do we wait and look at the quarterly review and, see at that point whether or not it would be a good idea to bring in? Because I mean, every department had to set up their budget, and I understand we have a new fire chief, so he didn't set this particular budget, but I mean, I would think we would want to do that with any department if we saw a spend rate going
Right.
off.
I
Like,
would-
I mean, like the library went off, maybe, if we had thought of that, maybe we would have at least, or if
Right,
that, if we had noticed that, maybe we would have called, asked,
that's
not necessarily called them in, but asked them, I guess.
that's a good approach. I mean, we'll, through Meg in her office, we'll look at the spend rate for every department. And, and if we feel that it's warranted to bring somebody in, we will do that.
I mean,
that's what
I understand why it's a big budget and we had big issues this year, but when we approved the budget, we were told that it was sufficient. So that's why we have a budget, but I don't know if it pops out. And this, Meg, I guess I would ask you, because there are different departments in that let's just say the pay gets paid in different, not on a like a every 12, every pay period is not the same. There's big jumps at certain times of the year. And I think one of the problems was one happens late in the fiscal year. So are we going to see that or are we not going to see that in the spend rate? And
Unless we start to use the payroll encumbrances, you wouldn't see it.
And
so then maybe we do need to talk to him. I don't know.
Mayev?
I agree kind of, Sarah, that I think we want to make sure that if anybody's showing up, but showing a significant spend rate that seems above what it should be expected, we should be talking to them. But I do think that given the issues we've had with the fire department this year, it would be appropriate to ask them to not only look at the spend rate, but to do some projections on a quarterly basis and say like, look, these stipends are going to be paid out in, I think there's a bunch that are paid in
Yeah,
January,
And we
something
know
like
that
that.
there are certain months of the year, periods of the year where vacation time is much heavier than, which affects, your overtime and your substitution
Right.
rates.
So Sarah raises a great point that that's one department where, a quarter of the way through, you might be 25% of the way through your budget, but that might actually be trouble.
Yeah.
Because you shouldn't be at that point.
Yeah.
I like the
And
idea of projections. I like the asking for projections.
Okay. So what are we asking for? Could you, just specifically? Sarah, what's your proposal?
Oh, I guess, I think your quarterly basis idea is a good, I would think that, I'm just trying to think, we look at the quarterly reports from a spend rate, but maybe in the circumstance of the fire department, then we ask,
Do a projection.
yeah, a quarterly projection because we historically, yeah, we need a quarterly projection because we don't know when we don't know because we're not using the payroll encumbrance system at this time when those big payments are going to hit.
Okay, so I mean, is it reasonable for Meg to contact the business office of the fire department and just ask them when they do their quarterly review to also do, their projection for the rest of the fiscal year?
Maybe
Be
give them a
reasonable.
heads up now so they can start thinking about it.
Yeah,
Just
okay.
make it part of their process, right?
Yeah, to do a written report, that's fine.
But
yeah.
I don't even think it has to be just fire. I mean, so
Right.
we sent out a message with our expense reports, right? We could tweak the message to say, these are your balances as of today. If they're extenuating, like, if there are payroll items or whatever that have not been, obviously I have to work on the wording, but, please alert the accounting office if there's going to be any overages. We're telling you what your spend rate is, and we're telling you if you're over your spend rate, but if we're not capturing that activity, you need to tell us.
Yeah, but I mean, is there,
Something different. If there's something out of the ordinary or something different, or if we've decided to add weekend hours, that's changing.
Yeah.
What originally, if there's something different happening than you budgeted for, it should be noted.
well, I want to, make sure that if you send something out, they just don't, take
Right.
it and put it in the,
So that
put it in the desk drawer somewhere, that, that they do
instead of
that.
coming from Meg, should it be coming from us? Yes,
We have
Well, I mean, on a regular basis, maybe we could send something to the departments to set the tone. Maybe make a draft something out that sort of says, FinCom would, on a regular quarterly basis, wants you to, look at your spend rates and do some projections to see how it relates to your budget. And, Meg, on that, whether it's, whether you've done or whether you do it monthly or quarterly, Meg will send, her office will send something and, we expect a response. What do you think? I mean, how to write the language and how to write it.
it can't force compliance.
I know.
But it could be a request that the FinCom get copies of those projections.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that works.
Yeah.
Okay, so you
did
do
that
that.
help?
So the directive is that I will send out reports saying that, this is your spend rate percentage should be. And if you're over, like, we need a plan as to how you're going to come in under budget. And then the last part of it is, am I actively asking departments to provide their projections
Yes,
Yeah,
Yes.
I think so.
not monthly, quarterly.
quarterly?
And you can put Alan's name on it.
At the request of
I
FinCom,
won't.
right? At the request of the Finance Commission, why
Yes,
can't we say
it's
that?
our request.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which we have the right to ask.
Or we can subpoena them. I always wanted to do that.
Yeah, let's hope
I don't
somebody.
think you have that authority, I'm sorry.
Huh?
We do,
You have that authority.
yes, we do.
We do.
Yes, we do. I mean, it's directly in the bylaws. We can subpoena
Got it.
people, court order. If we want, which I don't know if we're
I
gonna
think, Meg,
use.
if you say to them, if there's something that has changed in your operation that's going to affect this line and, or something like that, then maybe that will help trigger it, you know what I mean? To
Okay.
trigger them to think about that. I don't know.
Okay. All right, good. Anything further?
No.
I take a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Second.
Made and seconded, discussion, hearing none. Mayev,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes,
and
And-
chairman votes yes. We adjourn. Thank you very much.
night, guys.
Night.
Night, Sarah.